starting with Ms. Chioma Agwebo. I hope I pronounced that right. I really should know the proper pronunciation by now. Chioma's interests revolve around women, media, politics, and technology. As executive director at TechHer NG, she applies tech solutions to societal problems, especially affecting women. Whether it is chaperoning young first-time women politicians, co-creating solutions for sexual and gender-based violence, or curating sessions on digital freedoms and security, Chioma believes that technology not applied is not useful. Chioma's foray into advocacy began with the Light Up Nigeria movement in 2008. Since then, she has functioned in leadership teams for campaigns such as Enough is Enough, Gen Voices, Occupy Nigeria, Bring Back Our Girls, Not Too Young to Run, and now hashtag State of Emergency GBV. In 2020, TechHer under her leadership pioneered the Gender Reporting for Media Professionals, GRFP, an experiential learning workshop for journalists on fair and balanced reporting of women and girls. She serves on the boards of Plan International Nigeria and Oxfam International. Can we welcome Ms. Chioma this evening? Thank you for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Akintunde Babatunde. Sorry, just tech issues on my end. Okay. Okay, now I'm introducing Mr. Akintunde Babatunde. Akintunde Babatunde is an international development professional with extensive years of combined experience in project management, civic technology, and public policy. He is the head of the Natural Resource Extractives and Climate Change Program, NAREP, of the Premium Time Center for Investigative Journalism. He is currently leading an environmental sustainability and climate change project for journalists, policy analysts, and academic researchers across 5 countries, including Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Liberia, and the Gambia. Apart from that, he has successfully led and executed several projects on social accountability, fact-checking, oil and gas, solid minerals, water and marine resources, forest resources, and climate change, with support from international development organizations, including the MacArthur Foundation, Ford Foundation, Natural Resource Governance Institute, Australian Embassy, Oxford Policy Management, Center for Democracy and Development, and Results for Development. Akintunde has authored over 50 publications on public policy, governance, and fiscal transparency on both local and international media platforms, and coordinated 3 fellowship programs and over 20 capacity development programs and training for over 1,000 journalists, researchers, civil society practitioners, and government officials, which has produced over 500 reports, 7 policy briefs published in over 30 news agencies and development platforms in West Africa. Akintunde is also a civic technology expert, and his work in open data and civic technology includes designing a data-driven social accountability project, Udeme NG, designed to hold the government accountable on how funds are released for developmental projects and spent. He's an ambassador on UNESCO, with UNESCO Information Literacy Alliance, a member of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Youth Constituency, a climate reality leader, and a volunteer with One Campaign, where he's also engaged with Africa-Europe Task Force. Akintunde was educated at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, Pan Atlantic University, Lagos, MDF West Africa, and has an MA with distinction in media practice for development and social change at the University of Sussex in the UK, and Commonwealth Office of Chevening Scholarship for Future Leaders. Mr. Akintunde, we welcome you to this webinar this evening. Okay, next I'm introducing Mr. Kunle Adebajo. Mr. Kunle Adebajo. Kunle Adebajo is the investigations editor and head of internal fact check at Humango, which focuses on reporting conflict situations and humanitarian crises in Africa. He formerly worked as an investigative reporter at the International Center for Investigative Reporting, ICIR. He is a 2019 Fellow of Africa Check, 2020 Fellow of Dubawa, and an alumnus of the British Council's Future News Worldwide program. He is passionate about human rights and accountability, as well as how human-centered storytelling can help bring attention to these issues. Kunle has won a number of journalism awards, including the 2019 West Africa Media Excellence Award for Best Telecommunications Report and 2020 Diamond Media Award for Education Reporting. He is also a 2020 finalist for the Isu Elihe Awards on Child-Centered Reporting and a top entrant for the 2020 PwC Media Excellence Awards. I welcome you, Mr. Kunle Adebajo. Okay, grateful for everyone in the room. I feel like perhaps I should pause and have someone read my my profile too, right? Okay, but no problem. We're going to dive straight into the conversation. I do not need to emphasize the pedigree of our panelists to actually have this conversation. And like I posted on LinkedIn while I was trying to promote, just the event and inviting people to join, we have examined everyone every which way. Oh, what did the state actors do? The military, what did the military do? What did this person do? What did that person do? But we have not exhaustively discussed the media's role during the NSAS protest. How did the media do? And I think that simple question is how we're going to start this conversation this evening. I'm going to pass the virtual microphone to Choma to start the conversation. How did the media do in the reportage of the NSAS protests?
Thank you very much for that question. And good evening to everybody. I hope that folks can hear me clearly. I think that to be able to, as it were, talk about how the media did, we have to think about the atmosphere under which the media operates, right? And if we think about the fact that Nigeria's civic space has shrunk considerably over the last few years, we then understand that the freedoms and the courage with which the media used to operate, has been greatly whittled. And so we remember that, the NBC, I think it started in 2019, came up with a new set of rules, leaning very heavily on the fact that media practitioners must refrain from embarrassing the government, right? Or from allowing coverage of anything that embarrass the government. There are clear instances where people have been on radio speaking about national issues and they have received calls from the NBC to shut down those programs because they embarrass government. We've seen fines handed out to stations like AIT, etc. So it is within these circumstances that the media operates today. Speaking, however, to the coverage of the NSAS protests, I would say that the media organizations did their jobs to the extent that their hearts allowed. And when I say hearts, I want us to take it in context, with what I've just said. There were a few extra courageous media. For instance, there was TVC, there was Arise. They were the ones that actually became the darlings of the young people, as they went out on the streets to demand that the government stop killing them. But there were others for whom, unfortunately, this remained one of the issues seen through a political lens, an ethnic lens, but also, and this is something that we don't take to heart a lot in Nigeria, the ownership lens. So who owns what media, right? Because we often forget that the ownership of the media greatly influences not only their coverage of issues, but what they actually cover, what they prioritize. So there are media organizations that didn't even feel like this was worth covering, right? And they only started to talk about it when it seemed like you're the only person not talking about it. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts on coverage of the NSAS protest.
Okay, Akintunde, please jump in here. What are your thoughts on how the media did in covering the NSAS protests?
Okay, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here. And I think I'll just lean, towards what Choma said earlier, because I pretty much think the same thing across space. So, if you look at the whole thing being a media-driven protest in the first place, you get to understand that it became a very. Sorry, can you hear me? I want to be sure.
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. So you notice that the all in the framework of the work that the media do in Nigeria and the regulatory framework, that is the NBC, you will notice that it's a difficult, environment to operate. And we saw courage, we saw timidity on the part of some other platforms anyway. But I think generally, I think when the protest then became an instrument that the government was trying to use to blackmail even the protesters, I think some media organizations then took it forward again to then use evidence to show what has happened, and even up to today it still happens where media platforms still continue to show evidence of violence, evidence of killing and all that on the part of the protesters. But it's a two-way thing. So we look at some media platforms, they did really well, and we look at some that they said, okay, even in the face of restrictions, in the face of a very oppressive regulatory framework, they still get on to do the work. And then we saw how the ownership, the political affiliations of owners, the religious bias of some platforms also played out in the coverage of the protest. Even up to last week during the NSAS memorial, you would also see how some media platforms came forward to put out names of dead or victims of the protest, and some media platforms also say, see, protest has happened, but we still don't have evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the government. So it's a very mixed situation. And I think when we get forward, we can then talk about specific issues and why this is so. Thank you.
If you look at Apple, they have the iOS and you can build apps on it, and that is the foundation, right? That is the control. So
Adenike, you are muted.
Apologies, sorry. I was asking the same question of Kunle. What do you think of the media's role or response to the NSAS protest?
Well, as Akintunde rightly pointed out, it's actually quite mixed. But I think generally the media did well. But then the success of the demonstrations and the awareness that it generated was also not something you could entirely credit to the media. The social media played a huge role. And as Choma said, you can't discuss the contributions of the media without contextualizing the dangers involved, considering the fact that press freedom under the current administration has worsened to a large degree. If you check Nigeria's ranking, according to Reporters Without Borders, over the past couple of years, we are doing so much worse than we were 5 years ago. But then you see exceptional instances of courageous reporting from some of those media organizations that Choma highlighted, which is quite commendable, because we also see how the investigative journalism conducted by multinational platforms, but of course Nigerian reporters working for them, also went to a larger extent to put evidence to some of the claims and allegations surrounding the demonstrations. I also want to say that some of the mistakes that media organizations make currently is to prioritize regime protection over human rights, over accuracy, over truth. And it's the same allegation people have leveled against security personnel, the police, military agencies and all that you cannot possibly, your first duty is to the people, to their protection and to making sure that their needs are met, not to protecting or preventing the government from being embarrassed, in quotes. And then again, you can't discuss the media's reporting without talking about the challenge of independence and financial sustainability, because currently the model that a lot of organizations operate relies heavily on the patronage from the political class for them to continue to survive and pay staff salaries. So it's also about, as media entrepreneurs and executives, it's also about balancing the need for critical, accurate, and in-depth journalism against the need to continue doing your work and making sure that one does not suffer, or you do not do one at the detriment of the other.
Right. Thank you very much. And we're diving in a little bit deeper now. And it's to ask the question of, let's contextualize what we mean by they did well. I feel like it's important that we put some context when we say, oh, the media did okay. Even for lack of a better description, for those who got involved, for those who even reported, for what it's worth, what really is the definition of the media did well? Does mere coverage suffice? And I'm introducing these questions because this is how I want us to think about it. Does mere coverage suffice? Does it suffice to say, and I have on my screen right now, I'm looking on my screen right now at the reportage from Daily Trust, the reportage from, I think I have Guardian, and the question, I don't want to bias your response, but what does, oh, they did okay. What does it mean? What qualifies as media doing well? And I want us to base it or sort of compare it to what the media has stood for, especially in Nigeria, in the fight for independence, in the fight for liberation from military rule, and even other such protests. So when we say that the media did okay, what do we mean really? Again, I'll start from Gemma.
All right, thank you for that question. I think that with journalism, there are a few principles, and you can say that, you know, if those principles have been attended to, you can then decide to say, you know, people have done well or not. And some of those principles include, you know, fairness. How are you presenting the issues, right? I used to be a journalist back in the day till I found out that it doesn't really pay. And they don't have life insurance. But one of the things that I was taught very early on was, with journalism, you present the facts as they appear. You are also supposed to give context to the reporting. So for instance, if I say a soldier killed a citizen today, have I reported factually? Yes. But have I given information that, you know, completes the story? For instance, I could just as well say soldiers have been killing citizens since 2002 every day. So it then gives a lot of body to my coverage of today that says a soldier killed. The media, for the most part, I'm trying not to mention individual media platforms. You know, I believe that a good number of the media organizations in Nigeria did online of, you know, security forces harassing press. As a matter of fact, a journalist, you know, was arrested at the recent the memorial, you know, one of the memorial events for the NSAS protest. And it was again for people to find him and then, of course, you know, secure his release. So I think leaning into the principles of journalism, you know, are you presenting the facts as they appeared? Are you providing some context? Are you reporting with fairness? Are you you know, in women, the ethics of reporting women. And I think, you know, when you were reading my profile, you mentioned that we organized, you know, a training session in 2019 for journalists, again, to help them just think very critically about how are you reporting women, how are you reporting. Joshua very kindly was one of our resource persons on that. So it's, for me, it's a bunch of these principles. And when I say that, I situate that sentence within the present circumstances of repression, of you know, their voices being stifled, etc. I think also that whatever lapses or whatever information was lacking, citizens very quickly filled it out. I think that if you remember when the protest first started in October last year, some media organizations, I would, you know, if to use like local parlance, their mouths were not strong, right? They weren't really speaking through to power. But I remember that there were some television stations that came to the protest in Abuja and people chased them away. And they said, you're not reporting the truth. We're not going to speak to you. And then we saw like a dramatic change in their, you know, in their coverage. There's a media theory that I like a lot, and it's called the social responsibility theory. And it simply says that a society will self-correct, right? So in the same way that we receive content from some media platforms and immediately you say, these people are saying rubbish, I'm not going to listen to them. In the same way, a society can force its media to self-correct. And we saw that happen.
Right.
And for me, because I like media theories, it was really, really interesting to see. And that's why I'm coming back to the fact that, I think they did well under the circumstances, based on the resources that they have under the environment in which they operate. I think they did well.
All right. Okay, let me tweak the question a little bit for Kunle now. And it's that we've referenced the circumstances under which the media operates. And I feel like perhaps we need to provide even bigger context. And I know that we're all aware of the circumstances under which the media operates, but I feel like, especially for you who cover, permit me to describe it as things that we would rather you don't cover. And by we, I don't mean me, but I mean, you know who I mean. And just being front and center in eye of the storm when it comes to media covering stories and covering issues and the response. Can you provide a little bit more context on this environment within which the media operates that kind of shapes the extent to which they can do their work?
So to start with, you find that under the current administration, there seems to be that fixation that sort of awakens, the Decree 4 era of 1984, coincidentally. And there's also that fixation on fake news. Recently, our information minister, Uncle Lai Mohammed, in fact, said fake news could lead to a third world war. So there's every little social vice is blamed on fake news. And I believe it's a deliberate attempt to, pollute the mind of the population against believing anything that is reported in the media, regardless of how evidence-driven it is. So that's the environment we are operating, an environment where critical journalism is demonized by the government in favor of the single narrative that favors them. It's also an environment where it's difficult to operate without, you are paying taxes to the government. It's difficult, the economy is bad, so you can't even get money from, say, subscription. You can't get money from people buying newspapers because people cannot afford them and there are ready alternatives. It's an economically hostile environment, and it's also a politically hostile environment for journalists to operate.
Right. Thank you very much. Actually, I'm going to pose the question to you from a different perspective. I happen to have a little bit of knowledge about you as, and please permit me, this is for lack of a better description, sort of like an Aluta leader of some sort. And I feel like, would we say that, and again, please permit me, would we say that we have become fat cats as the media? Were these conditions better under the military? Were the conditions better under the military? And we know that the media was key in delivering democracy to the country. Were the conditions better? If we did as well as we did at that time, why can't we go against the grain now?
Right. Thank you. I think, and again, it's just an interesting thing because I think the Nigerian situation is really unique, and the environment. A lot of references have been made to the environment where we operate, but I think the NSAS protest, in the way it evolved, it was not necessarily driven by the media. It was, the continuous vibe that the protest gives, even till today, is still a social media and citizen-driven kind of engagement. And I think it's impossible to bring any conversation without paying attention to that reality. And I think the Twitter ban is an offshoot of the NSAS protest. No matter the kind of English the government tried, Uncle Lai Mohammed, like today, graciously used, for the information minister. And, the times are different, the military, the times are different, and the And it's because now, even if the media fails to do this thing, if they fail to report, there are immediate incentive that forces them to work. So one of them is the theory Chioma referenced. Another one is also the fact that the international community is also relying on the media to harvest their own source for their investigation. And if you look at the analysis across platforms, you will notice that at some point, the Nigerian media, the Nigerian media, international media had to even reference, Nigerians protesting had to start referencing international media. And when Nigerian media felt, this is unacceptable, then they started, and again, nobody knew this protest would be like this. It was also like maybe the EndSARS protest of 2017. People thought it would be the same, right? And the things changed and it became difficult. But the Nigerian media ecosystem, I think till today, we keep making reference to the fact that government keep denying they never took responsibility, but the major reference that even the journalists who went on to do evidential reporting to show victims or people who died or people who or casualties still rely basically on tweets or Instagram live or whatever from the social media. And that brings us to something that in academic theory, then we look of counterpublics to say that citizens themselves are originally harvesting evidence and then they stopped relying on the media. And I think on the 20th of October, when the NBC noticed the atmosphere, they released a 2-page guideline or what have you to broadcast platform and said, see, you have to make sure that your reporting would not embarrass the government. You would, and if you read that, and you would notice, and on the 26th again, they banned, they find channels, they find Arise and I think AIT. If you look at all of that in that, broadcast media, they don't really have that flexibility to operate, unlike digital platforms that are also independently owned. And in what I mean, they don't care about government patronage in a way. And some courageous journalists then went ahead to do reporting. So it's different climes, but again, I think what dictates what media platforms are doing or what they did with the EndSARS protest, because I don't see EndSARS as something that has gone. I still see that something that's I see happening around us. I think it's more of a government policy that is totally afraid and also shocked by the movement, and they try to do everything to take away the responsibility from themselves and then blame it on social media or fake news or what have you. And if you look at all that situation, it's then difficult for us to isolate the media or not isolate them. It's a difficult situation because it's an all-encompassing way. But the media were only able to do what they did because it's just the times that we live in.
Okay, thank you very much for where you landed that. And I feel like it has become important for us to ask this question. Chioma has referenced it, Kunle has referenced it, and Akintunde has referenced it. And the fact that a lot of media organizations sort of got up and started coverage because the people themselves would not let them rest. So it almost seems as if the agenda setting role of the media has been reversed in this situation. Now, if you go to a lot of traditional media, and please, if you can't see my face, forgive me, it's Nigeria. I know you all understand, but it's cool. You can hear my voice, and that's the most important part. A lot of, especially traditional media organizations, claim that the proliferation, the ubiquitousness of information is problematic for them in terms of taking away, maybe even amplifying issues of fake news and, all of that, but also taking away, enabled by tech, taking away sustainability and taking away finance from media. But here's a classic example where these people prove to be more agenda setters than people who should be traditionally agenda setters. Is there a reversal of role happening? Is this reversal of role something that, for lack of a better description, that can be course corrected, where we can have the media actually shaping narratives? Or is this the future of information? are things so turned around now that we can expect that the people begin to set the agenda of what conversation is, as is the case with the NSAS protest? Chema, please jump in.
That's a good question. Where do I start from? If you think about the advent of the digital age, right, which is the period within which conversations and information sharing via the internet became more pervasive, etc. And then you think about the evolution of social media and digital technologies and how that has created a public sphere that's not, administered by gatekeepers, which used to be like the press, traditional media, but now has everyone being a creator and a consumer of media. Then I'm going to say that we are leaning more towards the public or citizens determining what the agenda would be. So that agenda setting role of the press, even the that's agenda setting role of the press, hypodermic needle theory, those types of things. I think we've kind of shifted away from that. If you even look at advertising, and I apologize for the digression. If you look at advertising, it used to be top to bottom. But now we're more like left to right because people are talking more to each other and they will believe and trust each other more than they will a brand that tells them drink whatever and you will be fine or your life will be better. But to come back to journalism and the role of citizens, social media, digital technologies have democratized both the collection, the curation, and the dissemination of information. So flashback, 10, 15 years ago, if you needed to put your information out there, as a matter of fact, funnily, my organization, we've just finished delivering a training session on tech for change and tech for, the advancement of movements. And one of the things that we said was, if you go back to the World War, right, the issues that were prioritized were the ones that journalists covered. So when you talk about, impunity by, impunity against war criminals, etc., and a lot of the atrocities that happened in that age, they were only brought to light because of the activities of journalists. Fast forward till today, it is what citizens say is important to them. That's what journalists start to cover. So in some ways, it's a bit of an anomaly, but if you look at it in the context of, the democratization of information, the curation, creation and dissemination, then you see that it's actually here to stay. I think the other thing is that citizens have become their own media owners. So anybody with a phone, anybody with connection to the internet can create their own news. And I think this is something that jumped out really, really strong during the NSAS protest, because where journalists failed or where journalists were not present, for instance, a lot of the coverage centers on Lagos and Abuja, but it was actually the protests in Warri, curated by people in Warri, that gave birth to what we all know as the NSAS movement or as the NSAS protest. It was what they covered for themselves and put online that we saw and said, you know what, we're going to join our brothers and our sisters in this part of the country to protest these happenings. So for me, it's like, this isn't going to change. This is kind of like here to stay. We are in the era of people manipulating and exploiting technology positively to solve problems that they are tired of waiting for people to solve. It is the reason why you're trying to do a transfer to someone outside the country, or trying to receive money from someone outside the country, and it doesn't work. And you just jump up and create an app that facilitates that for you. In the same way, when citizens aren't able to read, I don't know if you remember 2009 or 2010, whenever we wanted to get responses from people like, former President Goodluck Jonathan, we'll be tweeting those questions at Femi Oke, now at Al Jazeera, at Christiana Mampo, at those types of people. And then they would, engage the government, and then the government would respond. But now people are like, as they hot, right? As they start to feel these things, they put them out, and then the government responds to them. We've seen Lai Mohammed respond directly to allegations leveled against him on Twitter, leveled against him on Facebook. As a matter of fact, the Twitter ban in itself is proof of the fact that citizens set the agenda, because it wasn't the media that covered, what Mr. President said that made them ban Twitter. No, it was citizens saying, you can't speak to us like this. We're going to protest against this. And that's what led to the ban.
Thank you very much, Chioma. Today I want to put this to you now, that what what should the media's posture to this sort of new state of things be? This state where we are no longer the gatekeepers of information, and the stream of information is not limited to media. In this day of the democratization of information, what should the posture of the media be? What is their role now? What should their posture be?
Okay, thank you. And I like that question, especially because in the conversation on HENSAS, when this guy tweeted from Delta State about police killing someone, it then became a trigger because there is, like accumulated, anger against the Nigerian police, over the years. And that's, it then became, okay, I mean, people now started tweeting and said, if you have been harassed, if you've been, brutalized by the Nigerian police before, by SARS, do you want to tweet? Don't forget, NSARS as an hashtag started in 2017, thereabout. But it was never that, vibe, that vibe was not there. Now, I'll come to your question. I was just going to situate my answer, to bring it from that end, to say, so the hashtag then became more like a safe space for people, just like the Me Too movement, just like, it became a safe space, for people to talk about their problem. And then you are able to, immediately pick on evidence and then shoot out. Now, what the media should do is something. So the government did something interesting, and I would bring it on. They said the Lekki shootings of October 20th was not as what people are claiming. And I think it was Kunle who reported recently and said, see, these are the names of people, of victims. That is what is not on social media, or that may be on social media, but not properly coordinated, and that is what media should do. So as much as the technology disruption has tried to democratize the whole information flow, and news consumers of yesterday are now newsmakers themselves, it's then important for journalists to now pay attention to the missing link, because you don't even have a choice. It's either you blend in or you're out of business, because no matter the quality of your reporting, you still rely on the numbers on social media to drive. That's why news platforms would also have to tweet their storylines with the trending hashtag. Now, if you are not when the Lekki shootings happened, and DJ Switch, the social media at that time could not save us, and what do I mean? It triggered the anger, and it triggered the conversation about the fact that there were live shootings, but situating that reporting to now say, yeah, and then that was, I think, journalists then started going to Lekki to say, after this thing has passed, who was here? So they started, doing reporting to interview victims of the killings, people who lost their families. This was done outside social media. Remember, you still need to rely on social media to disseminate the information, right? But the information, right, to say, okay, I was at the lagoon, I saw a dead body floating away. That then becomes the responsibility of the journalist to immediately collate all this evidence together and then give us the context. Right. So you don't say, oh, I understand. And that's why I would say that anytime I want to read the news, I ask myself, if this is if I can read this news on anybody's tweet, then I don't have a business reading your story. But the most important thing is that you should then take it forward, because the mother of the guy who was shot during the protest may not be on social media, and there is an angle to that story that is waiting to be told, and that's the important. That is what journalists or news platforms should pay attention to. When the Nigerian government said, they ban they find channels and other platforms, that one has an implication on democracy and freedom of expression. That must be told. That story must be told. So social media is driven by sensation and by emotion, and a lot of other unethical practices that we can talk about, fake news and all that. But the difference between what we do and what social media is the ethics and the professionalism that comes with reporting and situating these in the framework of human rights and the implication for the future. And that is why I keep saying that when you talk of NSAS, you talk of Twitter ban, because Twitter ban just didn't evolve. I mean, it just did not evolve. It's the hunger that the government was like, see, we felt embarrassed by what happened, and we must, take the voice away from you. And the evidence is clear what is happening now. So it's that evolving cloak, and it's important for journalists to pay attention and then situate their analysis and their reporting in that framework and the implication. And that is what social media will not be able to offer, even though we still rely on social media to disseminate information.
Thank you very much, Akitunde. Before we go on, we just launched the poll. So if you're in the room right now, you might have seen it. Please participate in the poll, just respond. And if you have any questions, you can just send it to the chat room. Just send it to the chat room and I'll ask that question. Now, Kunle, and believe me, I did not plan this, but I think it is quite apt that we bring the question of fake news and misinformation and disinformation to you. And this is it. Now that we're in a space where social media is inevitably going to cause some uproar, going to lead in terms of what conversation is about. I mean, I saw, and this is a very funny segue, but it's okay. I saw that a lot of media organizations started talking about Big Brother Naija because it was everywhere on social media. So if you were not going to talk about Big Brother Naija, it was almost like we don't want to hear what you're saying. But in that space where it appears as if the proliferation of media people, and I use media loosely here, in this space, what about the fight against misinformation and disinformation? Facebook is right now trying to, and this is my reading of it, trying to sort of kind of paint themselves white again, and changing their name and attempting to change their identity because of just how much, I mean, the debate is here and there around the room, but what they have contributed in terms of just the spread of fake news in this space where, and it's real, we have seen the effect of fake news, we have seen the impact of it in this space. What is the balance here? What is the balance, since we can't stop individuals and citizens from sort of becoming mouthpieces and setting the agenda for conversation? How do we balance this against fake news, against, I can today use the language, sensationalism? Someone comes, or one person is slapped, but he died 20 times because of that slap, and that becomes the conversation. And that's not even real at all. How do we balance this in a space where we're actively around the world fighting misinformation and disinformation?
Thank you so much. So it's true, misinformation is a huge concern today. Of course, there have always been fake news. There have always been rumors being peddled around. People tell lies, it spreads, it's normal. But with the advancements in technology, you find that, the problem becomes much more bloated and it goes to dramatic proportions. And during the NSAS protest, we also saw a lot of this taking place. You find people creating fake accounts. You could see as many as 10 DJ Switch accounts on Twitter. Some people faked accounts for Aisha Yusufu. Some people faked accounts for Renu, and so on and so forth. And then these people, of course, would post anything that is not as legitimate as what the persons they are trying to mimic would ordinarily post. And then, though it was a double-edged sword, because for the advocacy in itself, those accounts tweeted posts that went viral, that contributed to the trend, to the engagement and analytics for NSAS. But it was also, something that could lead to great evil. And really, there's little journalists can do to stem the tide, because when you actually report fact checks, they don't go as viral as the fake news themselves. So some of the instances of fake news I think I also saw recently was people sharing pictures to say, oh, this is also a victim of Lekki Toll Gate massacre, whereas those pictures were stock images, or they are pictures of people who are still alive, those accounts are still active on social media. And so the authorities or people denying that the shootings took place would sort of leech on these instances to say, well, you see, it means everything is not true. So that's another demerit, disadvantage that comes with fake news. So really, what I think we need to do is to advocate for the tech giants, like you rightly mentioned, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on, to continue to innovate around this problem. They've done that a lot of times in recent months, notifying people to say, would you rather read the content of this link before you share on Twitter, or telling people, employing journalists and third-party fact checkers to actually confirm the veracity of the post, and then notifying readers on social media about the possibility of such content being fake. So we just need more of these, especially with platforms with end-to-end encryption like WhatsApp, where it's difficult to trace the origins of misinformation, and it's really easy. But now I think WhatsApp has also done something to show that these messages has been forwarded multiple times, just to caution people to say this could be fake news. But I think we need to do more. So really, we just need to do more to ensure that we prevent the spread of misinformation to start with, rather than trying to, fact check post fact.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Chioma, I'm coming back to you, and we're beginning to wrap up. We're nearing wrap up for this conversation. Now, we've talked about media sustainability and the fact that, aside from political oppression, there's also financial oppression affecting the media. Now, in this space, how much money does the media really have to do the kind of thing that Akintunde has suggested and Kunle has suggested? We do not, I'm not certain, and perhaps you could have a different opinion, but I'm not certain that we have the money to deploy to the extent that people like Facebook and Twitter and all of them have deployed in terms of tracking misinformation. I'm also concerned a little bit, maybe not a concern, maybe it's really a question to say that, is the media capable of providing the depth of context that will give us the edge? So kind of like two questions. Can we afford it? Do we have the competence for it? Chioma? Hi, Chioma, are you
Thank
there?
you.
All right. Okay, I
Thank
can
you
hear
very
you.
much for that question. Can the media afford to do? Great. Can the media afford to do what it's supposed to do? I think that that's a question it needs to think about, and a question that it needs to answer for itself. And I say this because a couple of years ago, I did some research for one of the donor organizations on media sustainability, not just in Nigeria, but across the continent. And the truth is that, and I mentioned this earlier, that the way the media is owned oftentimes is the problem, because you have things like patronage, right? So if I belong to this particular political party and my party is in government, it means that all of the media ads from government will come to my media, and it will seem like we're balling relations. The direct consequence to that is, as soon as that party is no longer in power, all of the patronage ceases, and then you start to find these organizations flailing. There's also the issue about poor management of the media organizations. Where is the money that's supposed to be put into research? Where's the money that's supposed to be put into marketing, telling them that they should go out and eke a living for themselves, right? Where's the money for the creation of products that the media can now sell? I think about organizations like, Cable. I think of organizations like Premium Times that have diversified into production arms, into publishing arms, who create products, right? Who create products, who create services within their niche. So as they're covering, incidents that happen across the country, they're also deriving data sets which are sold, right? All of these things contribute to the sustainability of the media organizations. I think there's also the place of grants and grant making, that it's not just project specific, but allows these organizations and these media folk to invest, so that again they have a running pool of money to be able to do the things that they need to do. But the direct answer to your question is that there's a lot of work that the media needs to do to ensure that they're even able to compete. Right? Back in the day, I remember I used to have a blog back in 2009, and I would write like 1,000 words and feel like I had written, the blog of my head, and people would read. But these days, people want to consume information in 15-second blocks. I remember when CNN joined Snapchat, people were saying, oh, how can the almighty CNN join Snapchat? But they knew that if they didn't do that, they would lose a host of their audience who had gone to that platform. We see media organizations producing TikToks of their news stories. Why? Because this is where your audience is. Until the media in Nigeria sees itself as a service. And if you're delivering a service, you should be delivering a service to the people where they are. You cannot expect, I mean, we grew up in a culture where people would go to the newsstands, right, and read the news and have conversations. That group will probably always be there. But are you trying to reach new audiences at all? People spending money on physical papers is dwindling considerably. What is your option? Or are we always going to keep saying, oh, there's nobody buying newspapers anymore? What are we doing? What else are we doing around that, right? How are we, unionizing things like Ratao, things like NUJ, Press Council, etc.? How are they holding media owners accountable? Because a lot of times it seems like we throw our hands up, and perhaps I'm speaking, like this because I'm no longer a journalist, but, these were issues that we faced even when I was working for a government radio station. The commitment, and I think, but then I also worked for the BBC at some point. And if you look at the way we were cared for as staff, you can draw like a straight line from that to the delivery of our work. Because in working for one organization, I had life insurance. We had risk assessment every time we needed to go out. We had this and that and that and the other. The other organization will just be told on Monday morning, this is your beat, go. Whatever happens to you there, nothing. Do you understand? We've seen journalists in Nigeria get killed. What do their families get? Where is the closure? Where is the remembrance? Where is the acknowledgement? If I'm not getting those things, there's nothing that makes me want to put my life on the line for a story.
Right.
So I think for me, it's a much more complex question than money. It's also the heart that goes into it. If I don't feel like I'll be taken care of in your organization, the chances that I'm going to do, go above and beyond are very, very low.
Right. Okay. I feel like I should direct the question about competence to Kunle. Do we have the competence to, now we've talked about the finance, and I love the fact that Chioma has not just talked about money, but also all the other things that actually constitute sustainability beyond just money. But now, do we have the competence to deliver on this mandate that forces us to rise above 5 Ws and H and forces us to have deeper understanding of issues and be able to provide context and be able to provide explanations? Do we have the competence in Nigeria?
So you can't say generalize that we have or we do not have. A certain section of the media has the competence thanks to years of training, years of capacity building, and years of donor funding and support. And a certain section still has a lot of catching up to do. We've seen Nigerian journalists excel brilliantly when they cross into multinational newsrooms that offer them the resources and the atmosphere to thrive. And also because, there's that sort of tunnel vision to say, this is the story we want to work on, and then you get all the resources and all the time to work on that story, rather than what is typical in our newsrooms, where speed is sometimes prioritized over the depth and the quality and comprehensiveness of our stories. So you just see people nowadays going to social media to check on what is trending. You do a reaction story, you report things that somebody tweeted with 240 characters, and then you just, call maybe the police spokesperson and then publish the story without providing backgrounding and context, without doing field work, without going to the victims to conduct original interviews to gather direct information. And that's because, sometimes it's not just that people do not know that it's the right thing to do. It's just, as Choma rightly pointed out, the incentives are not there to do those things. And yes, I totally agree. We need to start asking those questions. The media exists to provide a service. Now that, the oxygen mask of advertisements and purchases are no longer there, you need to ask yourself, how else can you get money? And no, people are not willing to pay for your services until they see that they are getting something quality in return. So it's a two-way street. You have to give to take. And I hope that going forward, we'll continue to ask these questions and evolve, in a way that will benefit not just the media, but, the civic space and the public at large.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone. I think that the sentiment that you have expressed in terms of the media's performance during the NTAS protest is reminiscent of what everybody else in the room thinks, because we conducted just a quick poll while this conversation was going on. We're asking the people in the room, how would you rate the NSAS coverage? Do you think media reportage of NSAS was objective? And we also asked if people thought that shrinking spaces played repressive civic spaces played a role in how the media reported NSAS, and the sentiments are the same. Most people think the media didn't do too bad. Most people think the media was fairly objective, and most people think that yes, shrinking civic spaces does affect or did affect how the media reported. This would be my final I think final. If there's another final, you forgive me, but and it is that, do we think that the media holds a mirror up to itself enough? And I may not know where these conversations happen. I've been in a lot of rooms where we had a lot of media people. In my experience, I don't know if there's enough conversation around, look at what we did. How did we do it? Do we think the media is checking itself enough? Do we think there's a lot of retrospection that goes into, this is where we've been, this is where we are, that's where we want to go, will this lead us there? Akintunde, I'll start with you.
I mean, it's a difficult question, and it's also straightforward, because I think this conversation speaks to the quality, the kind of people who lead newsrooms and the exposure to global best practices. And what do I mean? Sometimes when we talked about the disposition of the media to, at the initial stage of the NSAS protest, there was no trigger. And so there was pretty much like, I don't care. I mean, it's not in my whatever to do. But when there was a competition and when there were triggers from citizens, then they were able to get on there. And if you look at the way we operate in Nigeria, so most media platforms are generally, or we don't really have, in quotes, a gatekeeping process that is holistic across platforms. And it's a shame, because sometimes you would see don't be surprised. This is October. In December, for instance, you may see a media platform that would announce Uncle Mohammed as the best performing minister in Nigeria, for instance. I mean, you've seen it happen before, or it just, so you would see a section of the media. I mean, a media platform last week wrote an entire editorial, in my opinion, to discredit NSAS protest and say, see, there were no victims, and that is it. So if you ask yourself that kind of thing, that this kind of media platform ask questions or try to look at what they're doing. But again, when most of the platforms don't see themselves beyond operating beyond the shores of Nigeria or beyond their own audience level, and it's also a problem, because most of the media platforms, they understand their audience, and most of their audience lean towards a certain sentiment. So once they appeal to that line of sentiment, then it becomes a problem. But generally speaking, when we talk about what the media should be and the role of the media globally, if you look at the whole, the old conversation happening around the world, you would notice that the media should set a standard, and it should be you competing, globally to say this. So the constitutional framework is there. Then we have what's happening globally, and you should also ask yourself, And you can't do this without also investing in the workforce or in the, in the resources that would be able to bring on board. We can start to mention, media platforms in Nigeria that are doing, better, but the question I would ask myself, the question which media platforms should ask themselves is that, can I pay for this that I'm bringing out to people? Can you pay for it? I mean, I think that's the best way to start thinking about it. This thing that I have written, can I pay for it? Look at what happened with Dino over the weekend. It's a shame to imagine that we are now leaning towards screenshot journalism, and it's becoming a problem. And when you start to ask questions about, this should have been done better, it then becomes gaslighting or some kind of attack on personal and all that kind of thing, because the standard against which people are trying to pitch themselves is still within their, their own local environment. But if you start to think, beyond Nigeria, beyond Africa, to think globally about what the media is and the role of media. I mean, in the United States, the media still call the election. It's interesting. I mean, they still call the election, and that tells you the centrality of it. And also, in our own reality here, in the last few days before Facebook changed its name to Meta, you will notice that there have been a series of reporting called the Facebook papers, about the internal mechanism of Facebook and the consequence on democracy, the consequence on public policy and all that kind of thing. But in our own climb here, a lot of media platforms still rely on this kind of Facebook for funding. And there's no way you're able to hold, that kind of platform to account when it falls short on, disrupting the ecosystem. And that's what is now being termed the media capture that is becoming a big point of concern for everyone. Can we do better? Maybe. Do we have the capacity? Maybe. But we have to continue talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, this is my real-time final question. And I wanted to go around, start from Chioma, go to Kunle, and then finally land on Akintunde. And this is it. It's a bit expanded beyond the media, but I feel like it also provides a pathway for the media to think around their coverage of issues like that. Is NSAS protest the template of future protests? Is NSAS the template for the future of protests in Nigeria? Chema?
No, it's not. And the reason why I say that is because every protest gives birth to the next one, right? So if you go back again 10 years, look at the Enough is Enough Nigeria protests, right? Each protest kind of just lays the foundation and tells people what's possible for the next one to happen. So look at Enough is Enough, look at Occupy Nigeria, Gen Voices, Bring Back Our Girls, Not Too Young to Run. I think that at every point, citizens have decided that we are going to engage government in this way, that way, or the other. And then they have done that. So what I think will continue to happen is these protests will continue to evolve. Leadership of these protests will continue to evolve. As technology advances, it will also change the ways in which we curate and create these protests. Again, going back to 2009, Enough is Enough Nigeria, there was no Bitcoin, there was no live streaming, there was, all of these things didn't exist. We planned those protests using Blackberries. Fast forward to 2020, when the government started freezing accounts, people started donating to the protests using cryptocurrency. So I think that, who knows what's going to be happening, in 2025, if we protest about something, 2030, maybe people will go to the moon to protest then. So I don't think this is the template. I think that some principles apply, which is, neutrality, which is people having one voice, people facing one issue squarely. I think that people will continue to learn lessons as they go along. For instance, with, the Bring Back Our Girls protest and people learned that if you have one person, those protests can very easily be shut down, which is why for the NSAS protest, there was the recurring rallying cry that it was leaderless. There wasn't a leader. It was just citizens across the country. So I think people will continue to learn lessons, but ultimately, this is not the template. People will continue to learn. People will continue to grow. And as the issues change and people change, we'll just continue to see different. I think what remains to be said is that government just needs to do better already,
I almost feel both scared and excited about the idea of yeah, this is not the template. It kind of feels like it's likely to get better in a good sense. Kunle, go ahead, please.
Well, I really admire Choma's response, and I agree. I think one factor we've omitted since we started is the COVID-19 pandemic and how it contributed to the protest. Let's not forget that there was a lot of frustration that piled up during the lockdown, and people needed an outlet. So it's something that contributed to also to the spontaneity of the protest, as well as I think the spontaneity of the George Floyd protest against police brutality in the United States. So until you have similar circumstances and variables coming together, it may be difficult for us to replicate, a similar protest as well. And then you should also not discard the fact that people are losing faith in this country. People are leaving. Japa is the new motto and slogan. People are living in droves. Akintunde is currently not in Nigeria for reasons. I mean, for people look after their best interest, and then people do not think the government is willing to, stoop to listen to their plights and their requests. I spoke to some of the protest organizers across the country in Kwara, Lagos, Plateau, and some other states. And what many of them said is, given similar circumstances, they are not willing to hit the streets of Nigeria to demonstrate, because they simply do not think that, any Nigeria is worth, risking their lives for. And they do not think that the government is sincere enough to actually sit down and say, okay, what are your demands and how can we address them? So I think going forward, we'll continue to evolve, we'll continue to innovate. And I really wish that will be done in the direction of, focusing on elections. We evolved beyond the Occupy Nigeria protest of 2012, which a lot of people said had a political undertone. And you see that during the NSAS protest, people were saying, no, we do not want politicians, we do not want, icons to come and participate, because we just want this to be a people's protest. So going forward, I think we'll also draw lessons from this one and make, public agitations much better and less riskier in the future. And what I hope to see is, people coming out to participate in politics, because political apathy is increasing every 4 years. It's getting worse, especially in places like Lagos, where you expect that given the literacy levels, people will be more willing to participate in elections, but that's ironically not the case. So I hope we'll have, a change of heart as a people to see that, our permanent voters cards hold much more power than we care to admit. And then we'll also see instances of people actually saying, the lawmakers that are representing us, if they're not doing enough, the law provides that we can withdraw and retract them. People are not utilizing these provisions. So I think those are these kinds of protests that we should, focus on subsequently.
Thank you. Akintunde.
It's always difficult when you ask the same question and you expect people to, respond in that order. But I think while aligning my voice with Chioma and Kunle, I think one thing that I know is that I think if you look at the enough protests, Save Nigeria protest, Bring Back Our Girls, and SARS, one fact is that it's, an accumulated, suffering, anger, frustration of the citizen against the government. And I think that is constant. And I don't know whatever form the protest will take in the future, but I know it would always be driven by common suffering, situation. And with what the media did with the digital disruption that's coming around, then the circumstances, would define the mode of engagement. But one thing is certain, that people would continue. I mean, I'm sure people who you interviewed, it is interesting, but I was going to ask, when was the interview? Because what we saw during the NSAS memorial spoke to the fact that even though people are frustrated and Japa is the new, I don't also think, a country of 200 million people, where 60% of people are not able to afford $2 in a day, that means it is realistically impossible for 80% Nigerians to japa. Let's face the reality. They can't, right? I mean, the japa may happen on Twitter, it may happen on on WhatsApp or what have you. But the question is, people who can't japa can't, continue this way. The country is not working for anything, right? It's only working for Uncle Muhammad and his people. And that means if that continues, the next protest, the next answers will be citizen driven. I don't know the form it will take, but I'm sure that, it would, because people were, people saw that they were killing, other persons, and they still came out. And that tells you that when you're hungry and you don't have a job, COVID was one thing, jobless, unemployment was also a major factor, for that protest. And when people are hungry and they're sure that, when I even go back home, there is nothing to eat and I can't japa, that means they would do anything. And let's not forget that we have people who are looking out to that opportunity, to latch onto that opportunity, to also loot, to also, and government is also interested in the protest. They're also heavily invested in disrupting the protest. So it's a big marketplace for every interest. And I think provided we remain humans and we remain, under the ecosystem of the current system where it only works for less than a percentage of the population, then there will be the next answers. The form will be determined by the technology disruption that will come in place at the time, but common frustration that forms the counter-public space where people are saying, personally have been harassed by SARS before. I don't know, but I know that on this call now, 50% persons, I don't have the figure, don't fact check me, would have, if you have not personally have that experience, there will be someone that have gotten that experience. And if people continue to feel this frustration, it's impossible for them not to protect. It's just impossible.
Thank you very much, Akintide. Thank you to our panelists. I kind of heard you say that there's also audio japa, but anyway, we can discuss that after this after this conversation. But I know that I'd mentioned before that if we had any questions or comments that we should put it in the chat room. But do we have questions or comments? If you do, you can raise your hand, the virtual hand, and we will unmute you and allow you to make the contribution. If you have any such question, contribution, thoughts that you want to share, I really do hope you do. Waiting to see hands go up or mics be unmuted, but I haven't seen. Okay, perhaps there are no comments or questions, or perhaps you want to ask later, or you want to send it in as a policy brief or as a report or feature, or anyhow you want to do it, you can always send it into Dataphyte and we'll publish you. Yes, I want to thank everyone for being in the room this evening. Thank you for having this very important conversation. I really hope that if media owners and media practitioners, reporters are not in the room right now, I really hope that they can revisit this, because it's on YouTube. They can revisit and listen and hear sort of advice and thoughts around what they can do around their own sustainability, what they can do, how they can elevate the profession, so that we're not completely ceding the space to tech disruption, or to a term that I find that some people find to they don't seem to like, which is citizen journalism. I want to thank our panelists, Kunle Adebajo, Akitunde, and Chioma. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Grateful for your time. I want to thank everyone in the room, everyone that has been in from the beginning of the meeting and are still in here now. Thank you so much. We promise you that DWS, that's Dataphyte webinar series, will continue and will be more consistent, and we'll be having the serious conversations, these needed conversations for this time. My name is Adenike Aloba. Thank you for listening to my voice, and have a very beautiful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi. It looks like we have family people left in the room. I apologize for not thanking the Dataphyte team that put this together. Biko, open the door for me. Oh, I beg. See, na beg, I dey beg like this. I'm sorry.
We shall see you on Monday.
But thank you guys really for making this easy. I'm so sorry. I just felt like we had gone above time and I didn't want to, delay people too much. But thank you guys. Well done, everyone. Thank you. And see you on Monday. Everyone owing me story. Thank you because I receive it before the end of the weekend. Samad Alpha, when you go share this money?
Hello.
When you go share this money? Oh, now you cannot hear me, ba. Now he's mute, ba. He's breaking.
Hello.
Charles, I hail you, sir. Good evening, sir.
Charles talk am say Monday, you know, open door for the door. Which important?